Welcome to Gen Z Insights, a podcast series from IFES, helping you reimagine what Christian ministry amongst today's students looks like, wherever you are.
One of the top priorities of Gen Z, living better, not just living longer, is highlighted to us in a new IFES report. This generation knows all too well that there's no health or well-being without mental health. Yet across the world, young people are facing a generational mental health crisis. How can we, as Christian communities on the campus, respond? Welcome to episode 3 of Gen Z Insights, where we are focusing on the generation in pursuit of well-being. All the way from the East in Malaysia, I'm your host, Annette Arulrajah, Associate General Secretary of IFES. Join us as we wrestle with questions like, how can we welcome and care for struggling students and help them connect with the hope of Jesus, the biblical vision of life in all its fullness? How can we ensure our ministries aren't overloading staff and students? And how can we help students and young staff navigate the balance between self-care on the one hand and growing through challenges? We'll start with research insights from Peter Dray, the author of a new IFES report about Gen Z, followed by reflections from our panel of guests. Peter's report is titled Gen Z Insights for Global Student Ministry. It's based on his conversations with students, staff, and leaders from IFES movements across the world. The IFES website is the place to check this out. Join us as Peter orients us and invites us to embrace a generation in pursuit of well-being.
Global life expectancy has improved dramatically in recent decades. Being healthy is no longer about simply living longer, it's now about living better. Growing up in this context, Gen Z holds a very different outlook on quality of life to previous generations. Many approach their well-being as a holistic, ongoing pursuit, rather than simply a problem to be solved when illness strikes. And they're deeply concerned about their mental health. Today's students and many younger staff expect the communities and institutions around them to support their well-being. That includes their campus groups, their universities, churches, and employers. So how can Christian student ministries meet their expectations? Are there ways we might better connect with this generation that values this kind of flourishing? In today's episode, let me introduce 3 themes that will help us explore how we might serve this generation that prizes well-being so highly. Firstly, to Gen Z, mental health matters. Gen Z's experiences, many of them growing up in fast-paced, disconnected cities, then enduring the isolation of the pandemic, and witnessing the limits of traditional health models, all of this has shaped their belief that mental health is foundational to their overall well-being. When I talked to Gen Z students and staff across the IFES world, I was surprised by just how much I heard about mental health, including in Africa and Asia. Even in countries where mental health remains somewhat taboo, Gen Z students spoke passionately with me about their struggles and their need for better support. In Timor-Leste, the local staff who were translating my interviews were shocked to discover just how central mental health was in their students' thinking. For student movements, this is prompting us to ask new questions. How might our student groups be welcoming to those who are struggling with poor mental health? How might we offer non-expert support? Do our staff need some mental health awareness training? How might staff and student leaders model themselves how their faith intersects with their mental health? How might we model healthy patterns of rest and sleep, even in traditionally sleep-deprived contexts like student conferences? And how can we integrate emotional and spiritual formation into our discipleship, showing our students that the Bible really does take the whole person seriously? Second area I heard a lot about was digital fatigue. I heard students' experience of this on every continent I visited. The reality is that Gen Z has grown up in an always-on digital world. Students told me how overwhelmed they feel by the constant notifications and on-the-line stimulation they have, and it's affecting their mental health. Students are needing to adapt. Some told me they take digital Sabbaths. Some use screen time monitoring apps. Some use separate messaging channels for work life and personal life. IFES ministries are adapting too. The Christian Union movement in Ireland, for example, has redesigned its student conference with shorter sessions, including reflective walks in nature. Gen Z appreciates environments like this that prioritize presence over productivity and depth over distraction. Perhaps these are things that you can consider next time you're planning an event or a conference. If you manage staff, it's important to be aware that younger staff in IFES movements are also insisting on clearer workplace boundaries. I think there's a real need for careful intergenerational conversations about healthy ministry patterns. Indeed, intergenerational conversations can help us all navigate healthy pathways of growth and sacrifice in a changing world. That's my third theme. I think that whilst Gen Z's focus on mental health is commendable, I also sympathise with some older staff who tell me they worry that it can lead to excessive introspection and self-protection. They fear that Gen Z sometimes avoid healthy challenges that could actually foster their growth. Do you know, secular psychology agrees with biblical teaching. Humans thrive in a stretch zone when we're not too comfortable, but also not overwhelmed. Gen Z, I think, need help discerning when to push through their discomfort and when to step back. But they also have important insights for the rest of us that can help correct our blind spots. So as I wrap up, let me emphasise, I believe Gen Z's sensitivity to mental health, digital fatigue and healthy boundaries can offer our student movements both challenges but also many gifts. I pray that you'll have wisdom as you walk alongside today's students and staff and help them navigate the tension between growth and challenge so that in this strange environment they can help further God's kingdom in the university.
Great insights we just heard about the generation that prizes mental health and holistic well-being so highly. Once again, I'm joined by a panel of 3 guests. I can't wait to hear their thoughts on what this aspect of Gen Z looks like, where they live, and how our student ministries can respond. But before we get into our discussion, I want to take a moment here to acknowledge that student mental health is a highly complex topic. In the 20 minutes or so that we have together, we'll only be able to scratch the surface of this very wide-ranging issue. But we hope this episode will kickstart reflections and discussions about mental health where you are. And one more thing, if you're listening today and find yourself in a mental health crisis or feeling unsafe, please seek immediate professional help. Contact your local emergency services or a qualified medical professional. We also encourage you to reach out to trusted Christian friends, mentors, church leaders, or your student movement for prayer and support. With that said, let's turn to our panel. First, I'd like to welcome Jacob York from Australia. Jacob, thank you for joining us today. Jacob is a recent graduate He graduated in 2024 and is now a high school teacher. While he was at university in Melbourne, Jacob served as president of his Christian Union's committee for several years. So he has had a lot of experience as a student leader. Jacob, you're 25 years old, bringing us real Gen Z perspective. We want to hear how you resonate with all this. So, my friend, how does Peter Dray's view hit home to you, and where do you feel some dissonance?
When I told my wife that I'd been asked to be interviewed for this podcast, she told me that I was probably one of the least Gen Zers that she knows. But certainly hearing that, what resonated with me was our generation's emphasis on mental health and holistic health, whereas previously perhaps to get an assessment extension at university, you might require a physical injury, a broken arm, something like that. Now simply raising that flag of mental health can quite immediately bring understanding and action from others. Certainly as someone who suffers from being a chronic overthinker, which can lead to being anxious at times, and also now being married to a wonderful woman who suffers from depression, I am really grateful that our generation is aware of and is willing to discuss and address mental health. It's a really positive thing. But I do particularly resonate, I think, with Peter's challenge there, that our generation, and this is something that can frustrate me at times, is not necessarily willing to take that step and be pushed and to be stretched.
Thank you, Jacob, for acknowledging that, yes, your generation obviously is very well aware of mental health challenges, and they are currently engaged in helping students. But at the same time, sometimes there may be some blind spots, that you need to be stretched in. And at this point, it's the right time for our second guest to come into the conversation. Professor Jessie DeZutter joins us today from Belgium. Thank you for your presence with us, Dr. Jessie. Jessie is an associate professor in psychology at KU Leuven, a research university in Belgium. Having earned a PhD in psychology, she has conducted award-winning research on psychology of religion and has authored or co-authored more than 80 peer-reviewed research titles. She's no stranger to IFES, as she became a Christian through the IFES group as an undergraduate. And some of you may have heard Jessie's helpful talk on mental health at the last World Assembly. You can find a talk on YouTube, and do look in the show notes for the link. Jessie, you've had a long career in psychology research, so I'm curious, what resonated with you and what didn't, as we heard from Peter?
What resonated strongly with me was his reports of older staff who mentioned that they worried about the healthy challenges that can be growth situations, and that Gen Z sometimes avoids these challenges. Of course, we need to acknowledge that when you are suffering from mental disorder, pushing the borders is not a good thing. But at the same time, what I sometimes see, both in my own children, I have 3 Gen Z teenagers, young adults at home, as well as my students and my lab members, that they have the idea that being mentally healthy equals feeling happy all the time, and that they need to pursue happiness all the time. But chasing happiness doesn't make you happy. And I sometimes have the idea that finding a balance between happy days and days with struggle should be a better pursuit, and is not really part of the Gen Z ideology. That was something that struck me and that resonates a lot with me. On the other hand, Pete also mentioned that he had the idea that Gen Z relies on the community surround them to support their mental health, and I do think that this is correct, but at the same time I'm a bit ambivalent towards it, because I also have the idea that Gen Z sometimes loses faith in that the community is there for them in supporting their mental health, and that they feel more isolated and more lonely in their mental health struggles.
Thank you, Dr. Jessie, both about what you're ambivalent about, which is that actually some Gen Zs do feel even more lonely and alone as they face their mental health challenges, and also the concern that you resonated with, that, we could be stretched a little bit more as a generation of Gen Z. And right now, it's a good time for me to bring in the third guest for today, Roula Abi Hanna. Roula is coming to us from Lebanon, the Middle East. Roula, we welcome you and thank you for joining us today. Roula is General Secretary of the IFES movement in Lebanon, and she's also a member of the IFES Task Force on discipling a new generation of students. Roula, you've been in youth and student ministry for more than 20 years. I'm curious, what resonated with you and what didn't, as we heard from Pete?
I really like the third point that Pete mentioned about the intergenerational conversation. And I think that a lot of things happen in these conversations because this is where the stretch zone is presented. This is where the Gen Z will discover how the older generations faced their mental health problem and their well-being, and how they have seen what quality of life means. Because I think human beings have always wanted to have a good quality of life and not just live longer, but we dealt with it differently. And I think, like what Dr. Jessie said, that this is also where we can see that this generation has a lot to learn on community, how to be together and not be isolated easily. I think this is also one of the problems that makes mental health more like an issue now, because people are more individualistic and living alone, and being in community can help a lot. And having this intergenerational conversation really helps to empower, to give hope, and to just share the wisdom and experiences of older people.
Thank you, Roula. Every generation has undergone mental health issues, and we have had different ways of coping with them. And you are saying that this is the stretch zone that we can go through together, where we can actually encourage each other through what we have learned. And now coming back to you, Jacob, since you are Gen Z, what have you seen amongst your peers at university with regards to shifts in students' approach to well-being and mental health? What do you think caused this?
I think that I've seen this shift both in my peers at university, but also in the high school students who are also Gen Zs that I teach. And it's this shift in the dominance of the type of language that we're using. So it's quite common for someone to say that they are feeling depressed or anxious or burnt out or perhaps overstimulated. And so I think with this rise of mental health, there's also been this increase in this prominence of language that we're really not sure how to use yet. As I mentioned before, my wife has clinical depression. That's a really helpful thing to know and a helpful phrase to have and understanding. But also the student that finishes the day and it's been a little bit of a rough day and not everything's gone right might describe themselves as feeling a little bit depressed at the end of the day. And so the lines tend to blur and these words lose their meaning. So I think that's something that certainly seen. That Peter mentioned a lot of sociocultural factors in his introduction, which I think we could point to as reasons underpinning this. At least at the human heart level, though, there is that desire to be seen, to be noticed, and for a pain to be acknowledged by others. And I think that's been perhaps increased by the COVID-19 pandemic and the isolation that caused, increased by individualism and the need to be affirmed from the outside. So a whole host of factors, I think, but there's something going on in our hearts, for better and worse, that we want to be noticed by others. And so we're trying to grapple with this language we don't yet understand or know how to use well in order to be understood or noticed.
That is very astute, Jacob, because you are talking about, yes, people are talking more about mental health, but sometimes there seems to be a blurriness about the language we are using to express ourselves. Thank you for that input that you have given us. I want to shift along to what Pete also said, which is that Gen Z is very concerned for well-being, and this means that our student ministries need to be concerned for it as well. So I'd like to turn to Roula first and ask you, how can our student movements help support the well-being of students and younger staff? Pete mentioned some ideas, but what stands out to you? And has your movement made any adjustments in this area already?
Of course, our region and our country is going through difficult things, has always been going through difficult things. So we tend to talk more, probably now with the Gen Z, about how they're feeling, how they're coping with what's happening around. 2 years ago, we have started to invite special guests to come and talk about trauma, about emotional awareness, about how to cope with these things, how to deal with it. And every time we ask our students about what special speaker they want for the evenings we do, of course, these are on different dates than the Bible studies. They will always ask us to have speakers who come and talk about mental health or well-being. And so we've always had speakers coming and talking about these topics so we can be aware, and so we can also have this place for this intergenerational conversation with them and the questions that we ask after. We even had someone come and talk about suicide prevention. And we were a bit surprised to discover that 2 of the people who were in the group had faced this. So these are common things that are happening now. And I think we're aware of the fragility, I would say, or the need of empowerment that this generation needs. And it gives us space to talk also biblically about how we can have faith and grow and just accept some of the challenges and also have a view of life that is healthy and not just expect that life would be la vie en rose, as we say, life is always happy, because this is also one of the wrong ideas that this generation might have. We also do retreats, so we can give time for students in nature to spend time with God, to ask themselves the questions, what are the challenges I'm facing? Because a lot of solutions can be found there in nature with the Lord. We also do mentoring programs. We started mentoring with 12 of our students this year, an intentional program for 1 year. And a lot of good things are happening in these sessions because students are having an ear from the older generation, and they are also gaining from their wisdom and their faith. And lastly, we are also giving the opportunity for our students, for those who need it, to have an expert help, professional help when they need it, because many have been through very, very difficult things in their lives, harassments or else, really they need help from a professional expert. We give all the help spiritually. We give all the help also with what we can from a non-expert point of view, but we also want to give them this opportunity to invest in their lives. And we pay half of these sessions and we make them participate in the other half so they can own this time and work on their growth and also feel engaged and responsible for this step. So it has been a big help for them to also be aware of their emotions, because sometimes putting the emotions in the trunk also means putting our faith in the trunk. So there's a relation between those two, and when there is a help needed, we want to offer it. So this is what we're doing now in the LIVF ministry.
Thank you, Roula. It seems that you have already made the shift to address this issue amongst your students and in your region, and especially since you're going through so much. Dr. Jessie, would you like to add anything to this topic?
Well, to be honest, when I'm listening to Roula's answer, I'm, as a psychologist, I'm really impressed and happy to hear the things that are offered. It's really encouraging to hear how you are working with the mental health of students. One thing that I was wondering myself also during listening to Pete's introduction, that I think it might sometimes be very challenging for staff to make the distinction between a mental health disorder and on the other hand, some challenges that are part of life. And I think that taps also in Jacob's reference that Gen Z uses a lot of mental health terminology and words in their daily talking. So I think it might be, if possible, of course, very important or valuable that staff can receive some mental health literacy training that helps them also to make the distinguish between, on the one hand, psychopathology, something is a disorder, and on the other hand, some daily challenges where they can push a bit the borders.
Thank you. Dr. Jessie, you will remember that Pete talked about how we thrive in a stretched zone. And he noted that Gen Z might need help in discerning when to push through discomfort and to take on a challenge versus when to step back and protect their mental health. How do you think our ministries can do that? And a connected question, how can our ministries responsibly distinguish between when a student might be having a resilience issue and could do with some coaching, and when someone might have a more serious mental health condition?
First of all, I think staff educating more about recognition of mental health disorders might be something important. Being able to identify signs and symptoms of a mental health disorder and distinguishing them from the natural ups and downs in life. For example, when a student is feeling anxious for an exam, it's quite normal. But of course, if a student is feeling anxious to go to class or to do grocery shopping or to be in a room with people, the intensity is different. Also, when a student is feeling a bit sad after a rough day, like Jacob mentioned, they can say, I'm feeling depressed, but it's different than when you are feeling sad and inactive and experience no sense of meaning in your life for several weeks. So there, the frequency is different. So I think if staff can be more educated on the intensity and the frequency to make a distinction between signs and symptoms of psychopathology on the one hand, and on the other hand, just things that are part of life where they can push a bit their students, that would be a valuable part. And I also think, in line with what Roula said, that having the knowledge of where you can seek help, that might also be important for staff. In some countries, it might be very obvious where you search for mental health support, but in other countries, it might be more difficult. And maybe discussing with the staff, where can we refer when we see that the signs are really signs of psychopathology? Are there student counseling services? Do we have GPs? Is there a helpline? That's something also valuable within the team to support the students.
Thank you, Jessie. You emphasize again to us staff education to distinguish signs and symptoms of really mental health problems or whether it's just a normal passage of life is important, and also knowing where we can seek help. Time has passed by so fast as we have been talking. And, I want to thank you, Jacob, Jessie, Roula, for joining us today and enriching this discussion. But as a key takeaway, I'm going to ask each one of you for one phrase you'd like to leave with us today. Dr. Jessie, what is one phrase that you would like to leave with us?
I think for the staff, try to be present with your students.
And what about you, Roula?
I would say keep a balance. Share the faith, this journey of faith you've been on, and also walk along them as they discover Christ more and grow in Him, because He is the purpose. And it can go through well-being, but it can also be a total different answer we need. So walk along them in this journey of faith and keep a balance between stretching them and also caring for them.
And Jacob?
I think that mental health is important, but it is not your God. So seek God and His face, know Him, and walk with others.
Thank you, each one of you, for being here today. And for those of you listening, thank you also for joining us. If you'd like to explore this topic further, we have resources to help you do just that. Visit ifesworld.org and look for the Gen Z Insights Resources Hub. There you'll find Peter's report, Bible study reflections, and resources from across our fellowship and beyond. And before we say goodbye, let me mention once again that if you think you're having a mental health crisis, we do encourage you to seek immediate professional help. And do also reach out to trusted friends, mentors, church leaders, or your student movement for prayer and support. You don't need to face this alone. Lastly, we hope all of you will join us next time where we will look at the spiritually open generation. Finally, if you have enjoyed this episode, do follow us on your favorite podcast platform. Goodbye from all of us at IFES.
Let's